the tens of thousands of children at the border with the same generosity that it has treated you and me?
Well, I think that we have a very generous immigration policy in this country in which we let in 800 to 1 million people every year legally. The tricky thing about what's going on at the border right now is that we hear that these people are refugees, but they're not really refugees. Refugees are people who are fleeing tyranny or people who are fleeing revolution or civil war. There is no civil war going on in South America.
But
most of those governments are democratic.
You don't want to send back children who have been threatened by gangs or who could be killed if they're being deported. I mean, is that your idea? Would you send them back?
It's the journey from Central America to the American border that's probably the most dangerous expedition. We have encouraged that to happen by signaling that we're not serious about enforcing our immigration laws, and we're trying to give amnesty to lawbreakers who are in the country now. I would treat those kids, I would feed them, and then I would reunite them with their families in their own country.
Dinesh, what has happened with the GOP? They block immigration reform in the House, and sometimes they do not understand that they might lose again the White House in 2016 simply because they won't have enough Latino votes. What happened? How do you explain it?
I think this is all very sad because this is a country that's built by immigrants. It's immigrant virtues of deferred gratification, frugality, hard work, enterprise. That's what the immigrants brought to this country. That's what they bring to this country today. It seems to me what we should do now is lock the border and then have a sensible debate about immigration reform in this country.
The problem
is that I think we should lock the border first and then have the debate.
But how can we do that? It would be impossible. 40% of immigrants illegally come by plane. So how do you do that?
We live in an era of technology. I mean, if our government can actually be downloading our contact lists and looking at our phone calls and following our every movement, you don't think that they can track immigrants who are coming across the border? They have the ability to do that. What's missing is the political will. So I think we can be generous and firm at the same time.
Well, what would 2016 look like?
Well, I think that, we'll have had 2 terms of Barack Obama, and the country is in trouble. I mean, look at our economic growth is stagnant. So I think most Americans have a very uneasy feeling about what's been happening in the country under their noses. The government is listening to our phone calls, downloading our email, tracking its own citizens who are not suspected of any crime. So this is a government that's a little out of control. Do the Republicans have a viable alternative? I don't know, but I'm not happy with what's going on in the country now.
Let me go back to your book and to the film. Republican Florida Senator Alan Hayes, he says that he's going to introduce a bill that would make your book a must-read in public high schools. But do you think this would make teaching too political?
In some senses, I don't like the idea of must-read anything, but then I remember that in high schools, everything is must-reading, right? This is not college where you choose what courses you take, you decide what books you want to read. In school, they tell you what to read, and so schools have been telling people, here's Al Gore's film on global warming, watch it. So in some senses, I think what the senator is trying to do in Florida is say, listen, the young people are already getting the other side. This book will help them to get a pro-American perspective written by an immigrant. Maybe it'll help them to understand some good things about America.
Dinesh, would you mind if I ask you what your legal situation is right now? You pleaded guilty to finance fraud for aiding a candidate. What's going to happen to you?
I just pleaded guilty to exceeding the campaign finance laws. I gave money to a college friend of mine for 30 years who was running for the Senate in New York. And I go before a judge in September to decide.
Dinesh D'Souza is one of the most recognized conservative voices in the country. He's a writer and a filmmaker. He was born in India, served as advisor to President Ronald Reagan. And in his latest book, America, he imagines what would happen in the world without the United States. Not without controversy, his book is #2 of the New York Times bestseller list. Dinesh D'Souza joins us now from San Diego. Dinesh, it's a pleasure to talk to you again.
Jorge, it's good to be on the show with you.
So what would happen in this planet without America?
America was critical, for example, in winning World War II. If there wasn't an America, it's really hard to see the Allies being able to win that war. Look at the Cold War, which lasted about 40 years, even more, and America won that war. So if the United States wasn't around, the Soviet Union might well be intact, and the world today might be choosing between Islamic radicalism on the one hand, Soviet communism on the other hand. So I'm an immigrant, and as I look at America, it seems to me America has done a whole lot of good for the world, despite the mistakes that we've made.
Dinesh, in the past, you've been very critical of President Barack Obama. However, you might remember that in West Point just recently, President Obama said the United States is and remains the one indispensable nation So in a way, you and President Barack Obama at least agree on this.
I think my criticism of Obama would be the fact that America, I think, has been losing influence around the world. Look at all these events that are swirling in the Middle East, from Iraq, the problems in Gaza and Israel. Look at what's happening with Putin in the Ukraine. It seems like it used to be in the United States that these things could not happen without the United States having a big say-so, if not controlling the outcome. But now we seem to be almost a helpless observer of events around the world. Yeah, I think we have to back up a little further, because the first fascist regime in the world was not Hitler, it was Mussolini. Mussolini, in a sense, was the founder of fascism as a political phenomenon. Now, Mussolini was a lifelong Marxist, he was a socialist, and his fascism grew out of that. In other words, Mussolini saw that the prophecies of Marx were not coming true. And he thought that part of the reason for that is that people's loyalty wasn't just based on class, it was also based on their love of nation. And so Mussolini began to marry the concepts of nationalism with socialism, creating, if you will, national socialism. Later, of course, Hitler called himself a national socialist. Now, what's remarkable is that now, when we look back at all that, the left has performed a kind of sleight of hand. They've taken the socialism out of National Socialism. They've forgotten that these phenomena were on the left, and they've sort of moved them into the right-wing column, where they can conveniently use it to bash Republicans, conservatives, and Christians.